hope this works out. Okay. 7 minutes. Is anybody not ready?
Before you guys begin, could you put in your speaker order in the chat?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Just so I know, like for speaker points, who's speaking.
Okay.
Awesome, thank you. So whenever you're ready.
Sounds good. Okay, 7 minutes. Anybody not ready? Okay. My time will begin now. I strongly affirm the resolution that the United States federal government should require businesses to release information necessary for the repair of their products. Now, this is going to be a policy round as indicated by the word should in the resolution, which means that we should be weighing this round on net benefits, or whoever can create the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people. And we're going to be affirming this resolution in today's debate for two key reasons, e-waste and accessibility. So with that, I'll go right into our first contention, which is going to be that of electronic waste. What we see happening in the status quo right now is first, that the usage of electronic devices is increasing, especially during the pandemic. A is that electronic device usage grew by 4.3% from 2020 to 2021 in the US, and B is that according to a 2020 study, the average American had access to more than 10 connected devices. Second is that this has led to an increase in hazardous waste, specifically e-waste. A is that unusable electronics are often thrown away as people simply don't know how to fix them. And due to this, each US family trashes 400 iPhones worth of e-waste every single year. B is that there's 6.9 million tons of e-waste in the US, making up more than 2/3 of heavy metals in landfills, and sees that the combined value of disposed materials were $7.49 billion. So you see that right now, even as electronics are increasing, the amount of waste that we have is also increasing and losing our economy and people generally a lot of money right now. It's also contributing to a lot of this heavy metals and landfills, which ultimately leads to pollution, which is on net doing a lot of harm in the status quo. However, the AF plan is able to resolve all of this because by releasing information for the repair of products, we increase the longevity of products because people are able to fix their products on their own without having to go to a mechanic, which ensures that they actually get access to this repair a lot more easily. Furthermore, we see that the cost of repairs is pretty high in the status quo, which means that we see that people are further disincentivized from going to get their products repaired because they realize that it's probably just cheaper to buy a new product instead of going to repair it, which is ultimately leading to a lot of new waste. However, when we have the information, not only are they able to fix their products, but they can also go to cheaper repair shops that actually have the expertise now to be able to fix generic electronics, such as smartphones, such as devices that are always going to be critical in order to repair products. The second thing that happens here is that repairing products is going to increase the likelihood that people reuse these products because no longer are they going to want to have to buy new products when they could simply save more money by reusing their products. That means that people aren't going to buy new products that are going to unsustainably use resources. That means that third, we decrease environmental harms because remanufactured parts save up to 85% of material and energy costs relative to producing a comparable new products. So when we're simply replacing small amounts of the product instead of buying a whole new one, we're saving a lot of both money, energy, and decreasing the environmental damage that we're doing. But B is that we decrease the amount of toxic heavy metals in landfills, which can cause leaching and contaminate groundwater supplies as well as surface water, which ultimately does a lot of environmental damage. The second thing that we see happening from this is that it curbs the black market abroad because recycling is such an expensive process. Around 8 million tons of old phones and other discarded electronics in the US are shipped to China and other impoverished nations. And ideally, electronics are broken down professionally, but instead, unqualified laborers place them into unsanitary conditions to break down the device into valuable elements like copper and gold, which often exposes themselves to lead, mercury, and other toxins because fundamentally, this process is very dangerous and not good. The impact of this is first going to be that of the environment, because we see that decreasing carbon emissions by decreasing industrial processes needed to make new products is going to be pretty important, as it accounts for 23% of greenhouse gases in industry. Every action to slow the rate of warming is very important, because every 0.5-degree increase in temperature leads to sea level rise, displacement, and massive death. So we see that decreasing carbon emissions, decreasing the amount of energy that we have to pour into producing and continuing to produce more and more, is essential in order to preserve our environment. But B is going to be that of pollution. We see that groundwater and surface water pollution affects both humans and aquatic and plant species due to toxins and e-waste, which disrupts behavioral and physical development. And the second impact off of this is just going to be health, because obviously the pollution of groundwater and the pollution of groundwater and the pollution in general is going to be very, very harmful to people as at large, because now they're exposed to all of these dangerous substances that could damage their health in the long run. Now, our second contention or reason to vote for us is that of accessibility. Increasing accessibility to repairs is critical to improving accessibility to technology and decreasing costs at large. Because what we see happening in the status quo right now is, first, that access to repairs for software is very limited, is that people often wait weeks for an authorized technician, even if the fix is as simple as pushing a few simple software restricted buttons. And B is that costs are extremely high right now, particularly for low income Americans who cannot afford the massive costs associated with going to these technicians that are extremely localized. Second is we see that this is limiting access to technology as a whole, because A is that there just isn't enough technology, as California's reported the need for 1 million laptops for students and Alabama's waiting on 33,000 student computers. We also see that because of this, there just isn't enough electronics to go around. However, we're still continuing to throw away a significant number of electronics, as 400,000 iPhones are discarded every day in the US simply because it's more cost effective to buy a new one. And this isn't just true of basic electronics, as tractors for farm work and even equipment for the army faces the same problems. And absent repairing technology, there's no way for us to replace the necessary technology right now. However, the plan allows us to create a repair industry, first of all, which allows people to repair things by themselves, but second of all also allows for repair shops to develop the technology to be able to actually repair these on a much more large scale and allow for much more cost efficiency. The second thing that we see happen is that this lowers costs, because a comparison of repairs coming from restricted authorized dealers versus repair shops found that the repair shops provide costs that are 1/4 to 1/5 of the cost of the authorized dealer. And due to this, consumers are predicted to save $40 billion if they are able to actually repair their own devices themselves. And this makes sense, because if there's less monopolization of the parts in the repair process, that means that more people can repair. It also increases the timeliness of repairs, because you don't have to wait on the backed up repair shop, and thus increases the access to technology, because it's more feasible to work with the stock we have and fix it so that it's reusable, which will on net lead to greater access to technology, improving education, communication, business, all of the economy at large, and also bring people out of poverty, because they no longer have to spend so much money on repairs for their devices, which will free up income for them to spend in the economy at large and increase consumer spending. And for all of those reasons, I strongly urge an affirmative vote. Thank you.
Okay, great. Before I start for POIs, if you could just say them out loud, because I might not be looking at the screen. And judges, do you have any preferences I should know about? Okay, I'll take that as a no. So if everyone can hear me, 8 minutes starts in 3, 2, 1, go. Good afternoon, judges and opponents. My name is Zahara Agarwal, and as the first speaker for the opposition side, I strongly negate the resolution. The United States federal government should require businesses to release information necessary for the repair of their products. So we agree with their definitions. This should be weighed on net benefits. So with that, let's get into the negation side counterplan. So our counterplan here is, instead of making the government require these businesses to release all of this information, we're instead going to support the expansion and implementation of certification and licensing programs for third-party repair services from the manufacturers. So such licensing expansion allows independent repair workers to get the necessary training for the correct handling of the devices, while also giving consumers certainty about the quality of the repair. Conditioning access to spare parts on the completion of a training program provides a win-win, not right now, provides a win-win scenario where shops are able to buy parts from manufacturers while giving the brands the necessary reassurance regarding the quality of the repair service. So basically, what the negation side is advocating is instead of having them release all of this information, we are going to expand the amount of licensing available for third-party repair shops. So yeah, so that's our plain text. So the first thing, just to preempt what the affirmation is going to get up here and say, they're probably going to be like, oh, we can perm this plan, or rather we can do both at the same time. However, this is uniquely bad because if you were to do the affirmation and negation plan at the same time, you would lose access to the benefits of the negation plan, because if these materials, if the repair materials were available like to everyone as the affirmation is posing, then you would not need the licensing, right? Shops wouldn't bother to go through the licensing process to ensure quality, because everyone would have those repairs and they could just access that online instead of going through the licensing. So any benefits from the licensing would be ruined, and instead you would only have the harms of the affirmation plan. So that's why perming would be uniquely bad. So now to get into our contentions. Our first contention here is protection. So a right to repair puts consumer safety and privacy in danger and undermines intellectual property protections and diminishes a brand image. Many manufacturers, including Dyson, Apple, John Deere, raise concerns over the right to repair legislation regarding the potential impact these laws have on user safety and privacy. There are legitimate concerns not only about privacy, because when you release this information to the public, things like jailbreaking devices increases and you increase the risk of malware, but we also see that much of this equipment is composed of potentially dangerous components like high-energy lithium-ion batteries, and the use of unauthorized repair networks or unauthorized parts puts both consumers and repair workers at risk. We see in the past, we've had like the Samsung Galaxy Note 7 fiasco in 2017, where a bad quality battery resulted in a user's device literally exploding. So when you allow like the general public to have access to this information and you turn away from licensing and more traditional methods of ensuring consumer quality, we're going to see an increase in all of these dangers for devices and a lack of user safety. We also see that by releasing information about technologies and devices to the wider public, companies are much more likely to be hacked by outside forces. If the government plan passes, we see a lot more information about companies going out into the public, and this kind of hacking is something that exists in the status quo and would only increase with such information because of the aforementioned jailbreaking, things like that. Second argument here is both consumers and companies are hurt. We see that like small businesses would suffer, like they can't repair their own parts because everyone has access to everything. We also see that companies are not going to want to innovate as much and make new products if it means they're not going to be able to fix them. Under the negation side, because you're still requiring some kind of licensing and like quality control, that companies are not afraid of their brand image being hurt by like bad repairs or people who don't know what they're doing having access to their like product plans. But on the affirmation side, this is a very legitimate concern. So companies are not going to innovate as much. Companies like Apple have already expressed the negative impact of intellectual property rights, R&D, investment, and the potential negative impact to their brand because of faulty repair services. Ensuring there's still licensing, but allowing more accessibility, it takes care of these problems. We see that making products more repairable also makes them less efficient. If you have licensing, you can still trust the person repairing your product is a professional, so you can continue to make products the way you need them to be. However, we see that basic economics dictates that they're not going to, these companies are not going to release products inferior to their rivals, right? And that's what they would need to do if they want to make products more repairable. We see that if all of this information is released publicly, companies are going to either be releasing inferior products to ensure that they're not damaged in terms of quality control and like repairs, or they're going to be releasing products that are far harder to repair because they don't want like random people like who are not licensed to be repairing their products and tarnishing their brand image. So now to get into the affirmation case, they have basically two main impacts here, which are A, the reduction of e-waste, and B, accessibility. On the point of e-waste, this kind of exists on both sides of the house, right? When you have like random people repairing their own products, we would go so far as to say you're not necessarily decreasing the number of e-waste, right? Because these are incredibly complex machinery that you're going to be repairing, that you're going to be giving more people access to repairing, and therefore they might be using faultier parts which are manufactured with more waste, or things would go wrong more often, meaning they're more likely to have more waste. But even if you don't buy this, with the negation counterplan, we solve for this because you're going to have less waste because you have more of these third-party like retailers being able to fix these products, but you also don't have that kind of like quality control problem, because at the end of the day, you're seeing a world in which these people are still licensed to fix these products and they know what they're doing. So I would say that both sides of the house would solve for e-waste here. We also see their second point on accessibility. They talk a lot about like tractors in the army, but again, we solve for this with our counter plan, right? Because you're increasing accessibility by giving more third-party repairs the chance to gain their licensing, you're increasing accessibility and like the ability of these people to get their tractors repaired. But we also see that these people would be authorized, right? You're not going to create this accessibility issue where there's repairs everywhere, but a consumer doesn't know how to differentiate between a good repair and a bad repair, and they could end up damaging their own property. It's also important to note on the point of waste that with this massive amount of information being released, companies will make goods less difficult to repair. So nothing really changes in terms of e-waste. So basically, on the affirmation side, they have these two main impacts of waste, which I already addressed, and accessibility, which we solve for, right? Because you want to ensure that you're allowing, on the negation side, we're ensuring that you're allowing accessibility without this problem of quality control and like the quality of products going down because companies have to make them either easier or harder to repair. If they're harder to repair, then you don't see any of the benefits on the affirmation side. And if they're easier to repair, then you get a decrease in the quality of these products. Therefore, consumers are going to be going through products more often, which would actually increase the amount of waste they'd have. So that's not something the affirmation is properly solving for. At the end of the day, you want to be voting for the negation because the counterplan basically addresses this idea of accessibility and making sure people can get their products repaired in order to use them for longer and not have to pay this exorbitant amount of money to like the original company. But we also see that ensuring you actually have such a licensing expansion will make sure that the quality of these repairs is still good. Consumers can trust the parts they're getting, and companies are not afraid of like intellectual property theft that would cause their development, their research, their innovation to go down. And the reason you don't want to be doing these plans at the same time is because releasing the information undermines this idea of having third-party licensing, and therefore you're not going to see the benefits of the negation, so a permutation is not feasible. For these reasons, I urge a strong negation ballot. Thank you.
Okay, I'll be going and overview the av case in order, and then the neg case. Okay. Fundamentally, the rise in e-waste and the inaffordability of products is due to the lack of ability to fix them, either by the consumer themselves or by the repair company. It is not a matter of whether or not repair shops have licenses, but whether they know how to fix the electronic in the first place. This means that only by requiring public information to be released can we decrease repair costs and increase the sustainability of such electronics. We would say that the root cause of the throwaway culture of America, in which consumers just throw away their electronics, is because they don't know how to fix them, and they don't want to bother taking it to an authorized dealer because costs are simply too high. This is causing serious health and environmental impacts that only affect people in the long run and as well in the short run. Let's go on to the first contention more deeply. Well, they have a couple responses here. Number one, they talk about how we don't decrease waste. This is simply not true. At the point where at the point where unusable electronics are simply thrown away, in which each U.S. family are trashing 400 iPhones worth of e-waste a single year, and the fact that the combined value of these materials were $7.49 billion, this means that this issue is very present, which means that if we're able to at least decrease the amount of waste that comes out of each American household, we will be leading to a significant impact in the long run. Then you should also look to the fact that being able to fix their products mean that people don't have to buy as many new products, and this means that they don't have to produce as much, and this is going to also save costs because we can see that like remanufacture costs would save up to 85% of material and energy costs comparing relative to producing a whole new product. Their second response here is that they will still solve. However, this is not true at the point where they don't allow people to fix their problems for themselves. They're just saying we're gonna pass out more licenses to repair shops who can't fix any product because they don't know how to, because only the authorized dealer knows, which means that they simply just do not solve the root cause of the issue that we're talking about. we will argue that e-waste disposal has a couple of implications. Number one, we see that decreasing e-waste would decrease environmental harms because we would be decreasing the toxic pollution that's going in landfills, and also the toxic pollution that's going into poor countries and like poor developing nations who are receiving these these collected e-waste to then unsafely dispose of. We will argue that when this e-waste is like basically improperly managed, it leads to a bunch of different health issues for the people who are like handling the waste. And also we will argue this is contaminating like domestic water supplies and also domestic um domestic households in America. Let's go on to the second contention of accessibility. They don't have many responses here other than that they solve this. Well, number one, not only do they not articulate how exactly they solve the inaccessible nature of software, but they also like simply just do not interact with any of our arguments. Number one, they have recognized the fact that California has reported the need for 1 million laptops for students in Alabama who are waiting on who are waiting for electronics in order to attend school. And we will argue that this is especially important in the case of like the pandemic. Secondly, they look to the fact that 400,000 iPhones are discarded every single day because it's more cost effective to buy a new one than repair. And this is because the reparation costs are so high. When they get access to like the information that will help them fix the problem, either one, they can fix it themselves, or they can go to small repair shops rather than designated authorized dealers who sell like their repair services for absurd amount of money to fix electronics. Look at how repair shops are providing 1/4 to 1/5 of the cost. This would save $40 billion and increase access to technology because now people don't have to be worrying about absurdly high maintenance costs. And this is especially important to low-income communities who lack the technology for jobs, education, and for like communication overall. Let's go on to the counterplan. First is the permutation. We will argue that both the plan and the counterplan can happen at the same time. We can release public information and also expand licensing. This is good because you can increase the accessibility of shops who know how to fix the electronics for the day-to-day consumer. But even if you don't buy that the plan, even if you don't buy that the plan and the counterplan can happen in the same world, in which case the negation did not provide um, a opportunity cost, then you should buy that. Number one, they can't solve the affirmative because the issue right now is that only dealers and authorized dealers who are charging high amounts of money know how to fix their product. It doesn't matter if third parties have their licenses if they don't know how to fix it in the first place. For example, like Apple doesn't allow third party like repairs even if these third party have licenses because they just don't release their information of how to fix their product. And secondly, they don't solve accessibility. Even if you mildly increase the number of people who can repair products, you don't solve the monopolization of the repair process, which is concentrated in these rich companies who are making the products themselves, which means that you do not solve cost at all because costs will remain high. Let's go on to the second contention. Their main argument here is that there's going to be hacking, that like privacy is going to be compromised. However, people are trying to go to black market repair right now, which is probably less safe because not only do they not know what they're dealing with, but we will argue that people who are repairing in the black market are probably taking advantage of the information that they are getting, which hurts privacy worse. Secondly, this contention even if you buy this contention, we will argue that our plan does not have an impact on hacking. We will argue that companies are already being hacked. Look to how like SolarWinds was hacked at the point where like one of the biggest intelligence collectors was hacked. There's no reason why it's harder to hack companies like Apple now than it is when the plan happens. On the other hand, we would argue that the plan will actually decrease hacking because when you increase the ability to fix the products, that means that hackers are less able to like take advantage of like vulnerabilities in the system because they know like that either they can be fixed or they can be developed further. Then they talk about how there will be like there's jail like they have an argument about jailbreaking. However, this is like isn't the IP used in hacking. Repairs are the opposite of gateways into information databases, which means that like um yeah, they're fundamentally they don't make sense here. Then their next argument is that small businesses and consumers are going to suffer and that there's not going to be as much innovation. they don't however, there's a distinction to be made between releasing information about the product versus releasing information of how the product can be fixed. We're not releasing the information of how like the product is developed or how like what the like innovative aspects of the product is, but it's only like the framework, the necessary framework for repairing the devices. We will argue that the brand image of these software companies or these technology companies are hurt probably more often when their devices are failing so often. And especially it's probably even hurt more often at the point where like their authorized dealers are charging like extremely high prices. Then they talk about how it's less efficient for a professional to do it. However, when like all the repair operations are concentrated into one area, wait times become more and more long, which means that it's probably less efficient in the status quo in this world in which everything has to go to this one authorized dealer. And so when there's like multiple third party repair shops who are able to handle the devices, that probably streamlines the repair process and makes products easier to repair. Then the last argument is about how suddenly companies are going to release products harder to repair, but that doesn't matter at the point where they are required to release information of how to fix it anyway. For all those reasons, I strongly urge a
Okay. I'm gonna just take a quick sip of water. Okay. I'll first start by going on the off case, then I'll go to the gov case. And any POIs, please yell them out. Time starts in 3, 2, 1. The main reason that you should be voting for the opposition side in today's debate round is because what the affirmation side fails to address in the member's speech is that companies are going to find ways around right to repair laws, specifically by decreasing innovation, decreasing quality, and changing the ways that products are built so that it's more difficult for people to repair them and they have to go back to buying back from those same companies time and time again. This piece of analysis was given by my partner in her speech and was fundamentally dropped by the member of government. This means that it flows on and subsequently proves why almost every argument that the government side makes in today's debate round doesn't actually make much sense. But first, going on to the opposition's case, what we see that firstly on the counterplan, they try and perm the counterplan, but obviously we expected something like this was coming. What we end up seeing though is that specifically the counterplan solves better for the issues that we see in today's world, specifically because the government side is basically proposing for companies to do a massive information dump on all of their products accessible to the entire public. This does a few things. Firstly, it causes companies to get really scared because they know that they're going to basically have all their proprietary information out there that makes their products a lot more unsafe, makes it a lot easier for consumers to get injured by their products, and as a result, leaves these companies in a really bad situation. But moreover, what ends up happening is that these companies need to find new ways to make more money because by releasing a bunch of these products and information on products, what ends up happening is these products aren't going to get rebought. They're just going to be rebuilt again, as my opponents mentioned. So companies are going to shift to products that are basically never able to be repaired as a result of this. So what ends up happening is that none of the impacts that my opponents talk about are actually going to be able to happen. So what we end up seeing is that basically the perm doesn't actually make sense because you're going to lead to a world where companies are just never going to allow anything to get repaired in the first place, and as a result no progress is actually made and you probably end up defaulting to the opposition on that case. But what we end up seeing is that the counterplan is able to uniquely solve because the counterplan doesn't force companies to do a massive information dump and release all their information to the public. Instead, what happens is it simply increases the amount of licensed repair shops that are potentially going to be able to license to be actually like federally recognized as being able to deal with these types of devices. what this means is that they're going to have more access to information, more connections with these types of companies, which means they're going to not only be able to better deal with these resources, but they're able to fulfill a lot of the impacts such as accessibility and making sure that more repairing is available to the public. So on our first argument, where we basically talk about protection, they say that we're not able to solve accessibility, but we are able to. We are able to solve accessibility, because what ends up happening is that we increase the amount of shops that can actually do these repairs, and as a result, consumers are able to bring their devices to those shops instead of getting the information, instead of forcing companies to release information to the entire public, which puts the companies in a bad position and puts consumers in a bad position, because they're often not able to actually repair these products by themselves. They need to go to a repair shop in the first place, which means that the opposition side's counter plan is the most effective strategy overall. But if anything, we solve accessibility better than the government does, mainly because the scenario that I talk about is likely going to kick in which companies are just going to change how they make products to make them significantly less repairable, or if anything, reduce the quality so that people won't want to repair them and instead just go back to keep buying the same product from the company over and over again, which increases electronic waste and all the bad things that the government side talks about. Now, on our second argument, which talks about consumers and corporations, they say that like people go to the black market in order to fix these products, but by increasing the amount of repair shops, they're probably less likely to want to go to the black market in the first place. But if anything, the idea that my opponents talk about is probably still going to happen in their world. People are still probably going to go to the black market, considering a lot of people don't know how to actually make their products in the first place, right? So what we end up seeing is that people are probably still going to want to go to the black market, which if anything leads to the worst possible world on the government side, because you're forcing companies to basically release a ton of information about these products, and then consumers aren't actually using that information. They're just simply going to the black market, where the black market's probably going to end up fixing it for a cheaper price. They also say that like there's going to still be innovation on their side of the house, or like there's not going to be a decrease in innovation, but this is not a really warranted response. But what we end up seeing is that tons of companies have already said that this bill is going to lead to a lack of innovation. So if these companies already think that, and the companies are the ones doing the innovation, it's probably reason that it's already going to happen. But logically, we can think about it, right? If you make it so that companies aren't able to profit off of their goods as much as they could have before, they're not going to want to innovate as much. Or if anything, they're going to want to innovate to be able to get around these sorts of laws, which is going to result in less repairable products being given to the market. Now, on the government case, so their first argument here talks about electronic waste, and they basically they concede a lot of our counters here. The first thing they say is like throwaway culture is because people don't want to fix these things. But if anything, we see like why would people want to fix their devices more in this in the government world, right? People don't really want to fix their products. They often don't know how to fix their products because it's a dangerous thing to try and do, because you're dealing with really difficult materials. But what we also end up seeing is that licensed companies getting access are able to like licensed companies getting access to this type of information, as happens in the opposition world, is probably the best way that we're going to be able to fix this type of problem. They also say that people are going to be able to save that like our plan doesn't actually end up saving costs. But what we end up seeing is that by giving licensed companies access to this information, and by like expanding the amount of shops can actually like do repairs and things like that, what we end up seeing is that pricing actually goes down when like people have to bring their goods to these types of repair shops, because what ends up happening is you're increasing the amount of shops that decreases the price as they attempt to compete with each other to repair these products. But what we also end up seeing is that the government isn't actually able to solve for the amount of cost, because companies are just simply going to be making new products that are less difficult to repair. But what we also end up seeing is that companies are going to also be releasing less quality products, which means that not only are consumers not going to be able to save money, but they're also more likely to be getting worse products overall, considering that the products that companies are making right now are generally going to be the ones that are going to be their best quality, considering there aren't these restrictions on them. So less quality products combined with oftentimes more pricier products is going to lead to a way worse world for the consumer that's really going to hurt lower income people. But what the final thing that they don't really mention is that more license is that we solve better because like we aren't releasing a ton of data, right? They concede a lot of this idea, they concede a lot of the offense that we provide on this idea of like hacking into companies and like malware being distributed, right? They just say it's happening right now, but that doesn't really counter the fact that releasing a bunch of information to the public is only going to increase the amount of times that happens. That hurts companies, that hurts the economy, and it hurts consumers who would have their devices hacked into. Lastly, they say like we don't solve on a lot of these issues on accessibility. However, we do, right? Because we make more repair shops available that increases accessibility. But if anything, they decrease accessibility because companies are just going to try and make devices less repairable. However, in the opposition world, companies don't make things less repairable because you're not doing a massive information dump that releases all the secrets of these companies. So as a result, you lead to a better world on the opposition without the perm. For these reasons, vote off. Thank you.
Okay, before I begin, I'm just going to be going over the main points of clash in this debate round, so if you're taking notes, feel free to flow on a separate piece of paper. With that, 4 minutes starts in 3, 2, 1, go. Judges, this round has gotten kind of messy, so let's take a look at what we have here. We essentially have 3 worlds. The first world is that of the perm, the second world is that of just the affirmation plan, and the third and final world is that of just the negation plan. So first, to quickly address the perm, my partner and I have already done a lot of legwork on it, and it wasn't really refuted by the affirmation, but a perm is a bad idea, Judge, because if they take our plan of licensing and integrate it with their plan of releasing all the information, you don't have access to any of the benefits of licensing because people are just going to use what's already available online. Shops are not going to be incentivized to get a license to be able to have access to these instructions, and therefore you're going to see a world in which you don't get access to any of the benefits of the opposition plan, so you're not actually creating a better world. So now to get into the affirmation world, basically they want to create a world where everyone has access to all of the information needed to repair these products, right? But the negation world is a counterplan in which only licensed repair shops have access after creating this certification, right? They only have access to the repairs after they complete their licensing process. We're just expanding the licensing process to address the issue of accessibility while preserving consumer quality. We're basically saying more shops currently will have the ability to repair these products because they'll have the instructions, but they do need to complete the certification so that you can be assured of quality, and these companies won't be worried about their brand image. They won't be worried about profits and innovation declining. So now to get into the main voter issues here. The first is that of e-waste. So we have a couple responses on this, most of which go uncountered. We see that in terms of e-waste, it's kind of something that breaks even because on the affirmation side, you're gonna have companies making more repairable products, right? They're gonna be easier. They're gonna break down more often because they need to have like people be able to repair them safely. So they're going to be so there's going to be more repairable products, or they're going to make less repairable products because they don't want like these people to have access to being able to repair them. So either way, you're going to see a decrease in quality or a decrease in repairs, which impacts accessibility. You also see in the affirmation world this issue of like education. Basically, they try and pretend that they're solving for all of this wastage in terms of products because now people can repair their own products. Judge, realistically, even if I had instructions, I would not be able to like fix the screen of my phone that's cracked, right? That's not how it works, and random people in stores are not going to be able to do that either. That's why the negation world is so crucial, because we're giving the instructions to people who can be trusted to get the right parts and assure quality control so that the prices are going down because more people are able to do this, but you're not going to have to trust like you're some random person to repair your iPhone just because everyone has access to this information, right? That's just not something that's efficient. So in terms of accessibility, they try and claim that we don't solve, but we do. If more shops have access to licensing and instruction, you're going to have more shops are able to help these people in rural areas. They're going to be able to kind of distribute these repairs, and you're going to see more accessibility overall in the negation world. Versus on the affirmation world, accessibility comes with the trade-off of everyone has access to the knowledge. This drastically increases hacking, this increases malware, And it also decreases the quality of these products because companies are not incentivized to innovate as much because all this information is available online. They also try and pretend they have solvency, the same solvency for accessibility, but just because everyone has the instructions doesn't mean everyone's able to follow them. And that's a key point they don't counter in this debate round, which is with us, when you have all these licensings for shops, you're actually ensuring that there's a wider variety of shops able to conduct repairs, but also that, yes, they are able to conduct repairs. You're going to see more wastage on the affirmation side because everyone is attempting to fix their phone and they're not disposing of these hazardous materials possibly. At the end of the day, the negation side has far more solvency than the affirmation because we're able to create a world in which innovation still thrives, products are ensured quality, and people are able to access repairs they need at lower prices while protecting against malware and protecting against bad consumer quality. For these reasons, I would just strong negation that. Thank
Okay, this is going to be the last speech for the affirmative. I'll first be going over some big picture weighing stuff, and then I'll go over the aff and then the neg. Okay, 5 minutes. Is anybody not ready? Okay, my time will begin now. This round comes down to finding the correct position while considering e-waste, technology, IP, and safety. And you're going to be voting affirmative in today's debate because the most important impacts in today's round are those of increasing access to repairs. Because it has two implications. First, it increases access to technology, which is both necessary in daily life for education, but also improves business and the economy and commerce and interconnected globalization, which is critical to the growth of our world. But second, that of the environment and health. The products of these companies are already harming people, releasing dangerous chemicals into the environment and harming both animals and humans, which outweighs any other impact. Even if companies start to innovate maybe a little less, what would you prefer? A world in which your water is contaminated and your children don't get access to computers in school, or having an iPhone 7 instead of an iPhone 6? I would say you're going to be voting for the betterment of our society, which includes greater access to technology, greater quality of life, and less environmental damage. And only the affirmative is able to actually solve these problems. First, the affirmative demands the release of repair information to the public and third parties as a whole. The release of this information is critical to people actually being able to repair devices. They tell you themselves, licensed companies getting access to this type of information is the best way to solve this type of problem, but they concede it's impossible for these companies to get access to the information unless you make the companies release it. Because the companies refuse to release anything right now, even to third party or federally licensed people that they're talking about. Just look to how Apple does not allow third parties to fix their devices. That indicates that their counterplan does absolutely nothing, because it doesn't matter if you grant people a bunch of licenses if they still don't have the information to fix products. But second, we see that this massive release of information that only happens in the affirmative world makes it relatively cheaper to afford repairs over a new phone, because it means that more people can actually engage in the repair process. Now, we tell you this also makes the world of the affirmative better than the counterplan, because in the counterplan, maybe you give a couple more licenses. That does not end the monopolization of the repair process. And we tell you this monopolization of only giving it to a couple people is what increases the price hikes and makes it unreasonable for people to want to pick a repaired phone over a new phone when they could just buy a new phone. Which is why we see that specifically releasing it broadly is critical to ending this monopolization and ensuring greater access to all of these materials overall. That means that fundamentally, only the world of the affirmative, only the world in which you actually release information, whether it's the world of the perm or just the aff, is going to be the only world in which you actually solve accessibility and increase access to technology. Now, on this idea of the disadvantage, they tell you themselves, people will probably go to the third-party dealers. So instead, they'll go to repair shops instead of fixing the phones themselves. That means that releasing information isn't going to lead to everyone fiddling with their phones. It's going to let smaller scale repair shops help these people, except these smaller scale repair shops are going to charge a whole lot less money and ensure that repairs are a lot more widespread. This is the world of the affirmative we're talking about, not the negative, that allows these repair shops to function. Second, unlike what they tell you, companies aren't suddenly going to make it impossible to repair their products for a couple of reasons. We told you that it makes the products less desirable because it just doesn't function beyond a certain point. But furthermore, it's unfeasible. You can't make a product that is impossible to repair, then it probably doesn't function either. which probably indicates that companies aren't going to want to suddenly make it absolutely no way to repair their product, because that also hurts their ability to engage with their product as well. But third of all, hacking isn't going to dramatically increase. Hacking would actually decrease, because when information is available, allows consumers to better handle and manage their electronics, which ensures that they have a better conception of how to keep their own electronic devices safe, which would decrease the amount of hacking into these devices that happens on net. Remember, the IP we're releasing isn't even the essential IP. It's not the IP about, oh, whatever innovations they've created. It's not the IP about the database. It's not the IP of anything that could be useful to hackers. Instead, it's just where do you put this product part so that it doesn't fail again? It's a different set of IP, so there's no reason why this would uniquely increase hacking when hacking is already on the rise right now. So now let's go back to the idea of this two-world comparison. And we're just going to argue that there's two worlds here: the world where you do the AF and the world where you don't do the AF, whether that includes a counterplan or not, because the counterplan doesn't really do much. When you're voting affirmative in today's debate, you're going to be voting for a world in which we have decreased electronic waste, because now people can actually repair their phones. They don't have to throw it off. They don't have to ship it off to impoverished nations in order to burn it into dumpsters and release toxic chemicals. We also see that more technology gets reused. This ensures that more technology is available in daily life for students, for the economy, for business as a whole, which we argue would increase the economy. Even if this moderately decreases innovation, even if this moderately increases hacking, the massive impacts of decreasing environmental degradation, of ensuring that people actually have access to electronics in the first place, is going to significantly outweigh the small marginal risk of whatever happens in terms of hacking and IP that isn't fundamentally very likely at the end of today's round. Which is why you're going to be voting affirmative for a world in which we actually have the ability to repair products. Vote AF. Thank you. Good round, you guys. That was pretty fun. And thank you, judges, for judging.
Great round. Thank you.
All right, so Judge, do you want to just submit our ballots and then we can disclose after we do that? Wonderful.
Give me a second to submit my ballot and just put a
Okay, I submitted my ballot, so just let me know when you submit yours.
Okay, I'm ready. Would you like to go first?
Sure, why not? So I voted for the affirmative. Um, so I guess I'll just go over my feedback really quickly. The round was really convoluted as there seemed to be a general lack of understanding of like tech repair shops and licenses. Granted, you guys didn't have like a long time to like thoroughly research the topic, so I'm not like upset about it, but it didn't make the debate any less difficult to judge. Like there were a lot of confusions for me. So a few issues that really confused me. First, I'll start with the AF. The AF wasted a ton of time in their second speech, kind of just repeating their contentions when the neg counter plan already agreed with all of it. Like decreasing environmental waste and boosting the repair shop industry are both issues solved by the neg counter plan. So I didn't really see any value in just regurgitating your contentions to me and arguing for them when there was really no argument against them. Secondly, the stat of 400,000 phones thrown out a day, that stat was like changed a lot during the debate. One time I heard like 4,000, I heard like 400 another, and then like it went up to 400,000 at the end. And one time you said every day, another time you said every year. If you're going to use a stat, try to keep it more consistent or at least clarify what you're talking about. I don't know if you had different stats that all just sounded the same. It made it very confusing. I also wish the AF had more tangible impacts. So you had impacts, but I didn't really have any like numbers attached to them. Like when you bring up that it contributes 23% of greenhouse gases, right? That's not an impact until you tell me like what an increase of greenhouse gases do and how many people it affects, right? So you bring up pollution and health problems, but how many people does that affect? What diseases do people contract? How much more likely are they to contract a disease, right? Saying that people are going to have more health problems, like that's an impact, but I don't have any real weight to it because I don't know like how to quantify it. So I think you need to work on quantifying your impacts more. Otherwise, it's hard to weigh how much your arguments matter. And then for the neg, the counterplan was really weird to me. Like just because people have more repair licenses doesn't mean they necessarily have the information necessary to repair the product. Like in the status quo, right? There are people with tech repair licenses, but they don't know how to repair iPhones because Apple doesn't allow them to, and the information is not provided to them. So I fail to understand how expanding and promoting certifications magically gains them knowledge on how to repair these products in which information is not provided for them, right? The information needs to be made public for them to like learn how to do so. Unless they're getting some kind of like secret FBI like information filing from Apple directly where they learn how to repair their products. And then there's nothing really to stop them from sharing that with more people, right? Or like making a YouTube video on how to repair them. Also, the idea that the public is just going to become mechanics that can repair phones to the extent that robs companies of money was kind of unrealistic to me. Like, for example, information on how to repair cars is readily available on YouTube, but not everyone is a mechanic, and car companies aren't hurt from people learning how to repair their car, right? And the quality of cars is not decreased. Like, if you're going to make a big claim that companies are just going to decrease the quality of their products intentionally when people learn how to repair them, I need an example of this happening, right? You need to show me one time in which a company's like secret formula was released, so they purposely destroyed their product, right? And I just didn't see that as realistic. Um, the notions that companies will try to make their products irreparable because people know how to fix it just made no sense to me. Like, how do you even do that? First of all, how do you make an irreparable product? Like, does it self-destruct when it breaks? Like, that didn't really make sense, and it doesn't seem good for business. So for that reason, I just didn't buy the neg counter plan because there were just too many like confusions and assumptions on what would happen. So for those reasons, I voted for the AF.
Okay. So overall, I thought it was a pretty decent round. I liked that everyone was very clear with their signposting and everything. I did end up voting for the affirmation or the government. So I guess to go over a little bit about my reason for decision. So both cases basically agreed on environmental safety, solvency. I spending a lot of time on that throughout the entire round wasn't necessarily the best time spent for either team. I think Gov was able to win on solvency for accessibility, and I did end up part of permeable. I didn't buy that. Of the Gov world, honestly, because it is needed. Information is needed, even if the licenses exist. And so Gov was able to just cross apply the opposition benefits. So that ended up, because opposition, you did basically agree on all other things, and the only thing that made your case distinct from the affirmation case was the CP. Because Gov was able to win on CP, they kind of won on everything. Aside from that, I did think overall the impacting in this round was pretty good. I liked that all teams basically clearly stated the impact of this is blank. It made it really easy to identify. And overall, I think that the signposting and just general organization of the round was really good. It was super easy to flow. So thank you all so much. And yeah, that was sort of my reason for decision. But overall, I did think everyone did a great job. So congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you for the feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck, opponents.
Were you able to record the round okay, Colin?
Yeah, did the recording work?
Well, I guess I hope it did. Well, pleasure judging alongside you.
Alrighty.
Yeah, I think we can leave now.
Cool. Yeah. Cool.